maintaining flexibility and creativity. One of the things I did enjoy in my organization is every month we had a question to answer, and the question is, what did you learn about the culture this month? I love that question, far more than how many people have you shared your faith with. Because that question forced me every month for 10 years to dig into culture. There was always more to learn. I left Kenya having a feel for elements of the culture, but knowing there was a lot more I could learn. I needed another decade to be there. Perseverance. I often say I came about this close from giving up being a missionary. It wasn't my relationship with the nationals that was the cause, it was my relationship with my Americans. I liked a girl. She was on my staff team. I talked with her about it. We both knew it wasn't going to work out, and I had to learn how to live with my feelings. At the time, 12,000 miles from home, you have to remember, no social networking at this point in time. Internet did not exist. I'm having to deal with my feelings with a roommate who, from my vantage point, I couldn't communicate well with, about a teammate who I could communicate well with and who I really liked, but who didn't like me in the same way. I had to learn how to live with it. I wanted to quit. I went through, I'm sure I would have been diagnosed as clinical depression. I lost probably 15 or 20 pounds. I was sleeping 10 to 12 hours a night. I was just, but I persevered. I persevered. Emotionally, I wanted to come back home, but chose not to. And you will reach times like that in cross-cultural work. To personalize your knowledge and keep cognitive complexity means you think of more than one reason why somebody might be doing something. And you're not satisfied with the easy on the surface answer. You're digging deeper. But you're also thinking about this on a personal level. You might have knowledge about the culture, but how are you applying it to this particular situation at this particular time? And tied with that is avoiding dogmatism, making sharp judgments. It's really critical to be able to avoid an unnecessary criticism of the culture in which you live and minister. You'll be frustrated by things that you see. There's no way around that. But if you let it turn into a critical attitude, these people, I heard one missionary say, Africans don't value human life. I thought, how stupid. What kind of a judgment is that? And in part, dealing with child mortality rates, he would say, a woman went to the hospital bearing twins. She came out with only one child. The hospital just said there was a problem with it. She didn't dig into it. She didn't insist, I need to know more. She was a foreigner in Kenya, dealing with a national hospital system there. And the American who observed it said, see, it's just proof Africans don't care about life. How sad to make that type of a statement about that type of situation without empathizing with, understanding with what was going on in her life at this point in time. The fact is, she had a healthy baby. And she was choosing to focus on that rather than focusing on what caused the loss of the baby, of the twin. To be able to tolerate ambiguity, not knowing what the answer is, not knowing what the situation is. I found at times when I was perplexed by something, I would dig into it. Sometimes I got very satisfactory answers. Sometimes all I got was a deeper murkiness that I didn't understand. Think back, if you're a parent and raising children, one of the things about raising children is they love the why question. And they keep asking why, and eventually you get to the stage, at least I as a father would say, because I'm your dad, or because I'm bigger than you, or because that's just the way it is. Be willing to ask those types of questions, but also at the same time understand that people themselves don't always know why they do things. They just know it's the right thing to do in their culture. Trust others. This can be hard to do, and a lot of times Americans don't like to do this. We had a case where we had 3 offices in one building setting called a compound in Kenya. And we had the continental office for our mission agency. We had the Kenyan office, and then we had the office of the school. In all 3 offices, in the space of about 2 years, money was stolen by somebody working in the accounting office. All three people were fired. But one of my colleagues said, I will never trust a Kenyan with money, ever again. And again, I thought this dogmatism, this unwillingness to trust, this taking this attitude that this is what all Kenyans are always like, was a complete misread of the situation. And there was an element of racism that was part of that as well, too. That was deeply sad for me to hear. Are we willing to trust and even to be burned cross-culturally? Sometimes the burning takes place because we didn't understand what was going on, rather than actual sin or people wanting to trick us in some way. And then lastly, avoid inappropriate criticism of the local culture. I talked about this a little bit in terms of avoiding dogmatism. If people gather around and they're criticizing the host culture, find a different place to be, or find ways to speak positively into what's being said. Does anybody know why they do that? Why do you say Africans don't value life? Why do you say you will never trust an African? I see these three examples, but are these three examples really representative of everything that happens in Kenya? You're saying all the accountants in Kenya are this way? Perhaps you've got some bad samples. Be willing to challenge the status quo if people are criticizing the local culture. Lastly, thinking through going into a new culture and dealing with issues of culture shock. Culture shock usually takes place anywhere from 6 months to a year and a half after your arrival in a new setting. It might be longer than that, depending on the personality. Mine hit in about the 8 or 9 month range, and suddenly I realized either I change or I die. Those were my two options. I can't live with this being who I am. I've got to figure out how to be a new me. I didn't use that language at the time, but I gradually over the course of time, I developed what I call my Africa switch. And when I'm visiting in another country now, I'll turn on my Africa switch and I'll act more as I would have in Africa. That includes things such as when speaking, I clearly enunciate each syllable. I might speak a little bit louder, not under the impression that shouting means they will better understand me, but under the impression that my accent might be strange to their ears, and speaking louder gives them a better ability to filter what I'm saying. But I will also slow down what I'm saying, because if English is a second, third, fourth, or fifth language for them, that helps people understand. Those are some of the things I will do. One of the things I will do. I'll be less concerned about time. I'll be very trusting of my host, that the host has what's best in store for me, and I can just relax and kick back. There's a freedom in that. I really enjoy that attitude. So one type of shock absorber is the ability to observe. The ability to pay attention to what you're seeing, developing a new set of eyes. Remember, I talked about learning how to watch Swazis talk with each other and see what they did with their eyes. I had never consciously done that before. Suddenly, how to watch people became more apparent to me when I knew I was looking for something in particular. How do they look at each other or not look at each other? One Asian student described it for me as an 80-20 type of effect. 80% of the time you're not looking in the eyes, and 20% of the time you are. That helped me understand the Swazi communication better. Second is empathy. I already mentioned this is one of the traits that successful cross-cultural workers have. The ability to understand things from the other person's perspective. This is a very important skill in forgiveness as well, too. In being able to understand why you were offended by something that happened to you, seeing it from their vantage point, not necessarily making excuses for it, but trying to see it as they see it and get into their heads, as it were. And then lastly, exploration. Try new ideas out. Try new practices. If you see something doing something, you're making an observation about it, you're trying to understand why they're doing it, begin to imitate it. Now, you might find that you can't because you don't have the social status, or because you as a stranger aren't expected to make that level of an imitation. But the willingness to explore should be an ongoing part of who you are. Some of you are more exploratory in nature than others are. I tend to be very timid because I'm afraid of making a mistake. Fear of failure drives me, so I'll explore, but I'll explore tiny little steps. Others of you will take gigantic leaps in exploration. Both can eventually have a successful cross-cultural sojourn if they're willing to. If the tiny step explorer like me is willing to continue that over the long haul, and if the large step explorer is willing to learn from their mistakes, even as they continue to make them. By the way, the large step people tend to be better language learners. I'm afraid to try and speak a local language because I'm afraid I'll say the sound wrong and I'll be misunderstood, and that's a type of failure to me. People who are better language learners than me often will be people who aren't afraid of making mistakes. They will make the mistakes, but that means they're practicing, just as our children make mistakes as they're learning languages. They don't wait till they have it all just right before they begin speaking. Anyway, this gives you 3 or 4 different ways to look at what it means to be competent in intercultural communication, and also some things to consider as you look at new cross-cultural settings and where you are right now. Perhaps a step or 2 that you can take to help yourself be a better intercultural communicator.